Hey guys, it's Chris of Highline Guitars, and you're watching another episode of From the Luthier's Workbench. In this episode, and probably the next episode, I'm going to be talking about zero frets. What are they? A little bit about their history, the pros and cons of using a zero fret, and then in the next episode, I'm actually going to demonstrate the installation of a new zero fret product on this guitar. So let's get started. So what exactly is a zero fret? A zero fret is a fret which is placed on a guitar's zero position. And the zero position is the start of your guitar's scale length. So if your guitar has a scale length of 25.5 inches, the zero fret is placed at 0, and then the bridge is placed so that the face of the saddles contact the string at exactly 25.5 inches. Halfway in between that scale length, or at 12.75 inches, is where the 12th fret is placed. So what does a zero fret do? Well, zero frets have two basic functions, and the first one I just mentioned, it establishes the start of your guitar's scale length. And the second function is it establishes the string action over the first fret. In other words, the distance between the highest part of the first fret's crown and the bottom of the string as it passes over it. You have to have a little bit of a gap there in order for the guitar to play properly. The history of the zero fret is somewhat murky. We don't know who invented it and exactly when, but when you look at some of the earliest examples of stringed instruments that were made, like in the Middle Ages in Europe, like lutes, for example, a lot of them are equipped with zero fret, and initially all they had was a zero fret. And that design itself, while it basically works, there were some limitations, and the main limitation was it was difficult to play those guitars because you couldn't maintain proper string spacing across the width of that zero fret. There was nothing holding those strings in that position. They could slide side to side. So when you play those instruments, you have to be very precise in how you press the string down to the other frets. Otherwise, you could move the string, and that throws it out of tune, and it just makes it really hard to play. But as the concept evolved, luthiers began to add a nut in front of the zero fret, between the zero fret and the tuners. And the nut could be made out of bone or wood or metal or whatever. But they would slot the nut to hold the strings so that the strings would remain in position where they need to be across the width of, the whole guitar neck. And as time continued to march on, that design further evolved when luthiers began to question why they were even using a zero fret. After all, why not just remove the zero fret, shift the nut slightly forward so that the face of the nut is sitting right on the zero position of the guitar's scale length. Then all you'd have to do is slot each slot in the nut to a depth that would achieve proper string action over the top of that first fret. And that's kind of where we are today. All the guitars, or the vast majority of guitars that are manufactured globally today, have just a nut with the face in the zero position. Now, if you've been playing guitar long enough, you've probably seen this zero fret concept reappear every so often. And back in the late 60s, early 70s, we saw a flood of inexpensive, low-cost Japanese guitars coming across the ocean that had zero frets. So at that time, the whole zero fret concept kind of became associated with cheap quality guitars. And as a result, higher end guitars kind of shied away from the whole zero fret idea. And now we're seeing, probably over the last 4 or 5 years, a resurgence in the popularity of the zero fret. So the question is, what's driving that sudden reoccurrence of its popularity? And I think to best understand that, we have to look at the pros and the cons of using a zero fret. There are two advantages to using the zero fret concept. One advantage benefits the luthier. The other advantage benefits the guitar player. Now, as far as the luthier is concerned, what luthiers really like about the zero fret is that it automatically establishes proper string action over the first fret. When you're using for example, a bone nut in the 0 position, you have to cut the slots to a very specific depth in order to achieve that proper string action. Now, that's not necessarily difficult for a skilled luthier to do, but when you're mass producing large numbers of guitars, that can be a bit of a challenge. It can really drive up the cost of the guitars because of the time that's necessary to properly slot the nut to achieve that action. With a 0 fret placed into that position, the string, which is in contact with the top of the 0 fret, gradually climbs at an angle towards the bridge. Because of that, at the first fret, you automatically get a slight gap between the top of the fret and the bottom of the strings. And that makes it so much easier to set up a guitar as it's being built, as opposed to slotting the nut. The advantage to the guitar player is that with a 0 fret and the nut that sets the string spread, if it's done correctly, you can use any gauge string you want on your guitar, and you can switch between gauges without having to do any sort of modification specifically to the nut. So if you've got light gauge strings on your guitar and you want to go with something heavier, it's just a matter of taking those lighter gauge strings off, putting the new heavier gauge strings on, and you're good to go. With a nut in the 0 position without the 0 fret, you have to re-slot the nut to accommodate the heavier strings. And then if you decide you want to go back to the lighter strings, you really have to replace the entire nut in order for the guitar to play properly. So in that respect, the 0 fret has a real advantage for the player. Now, as far as disadvantages, there's really one major disadvantage which could be a deal killer for a lot of people, and that is wear to the 0 fret. As you play the guitar, and especially if you play frequently or fairly heavy-handed as a player, over time you will begin to wear divots into that 0 fret where the string is resting on its surface. And that's because there's a lot of downward force as a result of string tension and tuning the guitar. So the strings kind of act like a mini saw, and over time, and especially if the 0 fret is made of nickel silver, you will very quickly wear divots into that fret, into that 0 fret. So what happens is the string action, as those divots get deeper, gets lower to the point where the strings start to touch or come way too close to that first fret. So you'll either render your guitar unplayable, or you'll get some pretty serious string buzz in these first few frets. And another problem with those divots is, as they begin to appear when you're playing the guitar, it will introduce some really unwanted sounds. Specifically, if you're a string bender, as you're bending strings, the strings can click in and out of those divots, and you can actually feel it and hear it. So that becomes an undesirable disadvantage to using the 0 fret. So why is the 0 fret making a sudden comeback? Well, it has to do with the material that the 0 frets are made out of. For years it was nickel silver, and nickel silver wears pretty quickly. And so in a short period of time, if you're an aggressive player or a frequent player, you'll wear that 0 fret so that those divots begin to appear, and that causes a problem with playability. Well, now we have fret wire made from a variety of other materials that are much harder. For example, stainless steel. A stainless steel 0 fret is going to last perhaps decades before you would ever need to consider replacing it. There's also titanium and a number of other metals. The cryogenically treated fret wire, whatever that is. Maybe in a future episode I'll dig into that. But by using stainless steel, and you don't have to use stainless steel on all your frets, because I realize some people don't like the way stainless steel sounds, but you can use stainless steel as the 0 fret and never have to worry about it getting those divots and wearing down. So I think that's a main driver as to the reason why we're starting to see the zero fret come back. Now, there is one other disadvantage to the zero fret, and it may or may not be considered a disadvantage. It just depends on your perspective. But it has to do with the installation. In my opinion, it is much easier to install a zero fret on a brand new guitar than it is to retrofit an existing guitar. And that's because with a brand new guitar, you can engineer the fretboard to accommodate a zero fret. However, what do you do if you're trying to retrofit an existing guitar with a zero fret, especially if that guitar already has a nut where the face is in the zero position? Well, in theory, you would have to modify the fretboard so that you could move the nut closer to the tuners and give yourself the space necessary to install that zero fret. But there is another way it can be done. You can grind away the face of the nut to provide the shelf necessary to place the zero fret in its correct position. Of course, that sounds like an awful lot of work, and it would be. Fortunately, there's a company out there, it's called Zero Glide, and they make kits that allow you to retrofit existing guitars with a zero fret option. And it comes with the zero fret, and it comes with a pre-machined, pre-notched nut so that you can just drop the whole assembly into your existing nut slot or the shelf where the nut normally would reside, and you're good to go. It does carry a little bit of a price tag, but it's really not that expensive. And I'll put a link in the description below, so if you're interested in checking out their products, you can take a look at them. Now, there is another option for installing the zero fret on both a new guitar as well as retrofitting an existing guitar where you don't have to do any sort of modifications. And that is, it's an asymmetrical fret. And I'm not going to get into too much detail about how this product works, because what I'm going to do is in the next episode, in about a week or so, I am going to demonstrate installing the asymmetrical zero fret on this guitar, which is a brand new guitar. And I'll also kind of show you how I did some tests installing it onto an acoustic guitar. That was an existing guitar, so it was a retrofit. And this is a really unique new product, and I think you'll find it very interesting. So hopefully you found the information in this video to be useful, and maybe it will give you some food for thought when considering the possibility of putting a zero fret on your guitar. And if you did find it useful, be sure that you give me a thumbs up. Tell me what you think in the comments below. And of course, keep it clean because I do moderate it. And if you don't already subscribe, hit the subscribe button. Then, of course, if you want to be notified when new videos are posted, click that little bell next to the subscribe button and you'll get notifications whenever I post up new videos. And right now I'm doing, I think, 2 a week, at least for now. So it's not like I'm going to be bombarding you with notifications of new videos. Although if I did, they'd be useful. So at any rate, that's it for this episode. Take care, and I will see you soon.